If you need to get speed back into your fight game, then this is the video for you. Hey guys, James here from Sweet Science of Fighting. Now I had a great comment on my previous powerlifting video by Matthew, and I'll bring this up on the screen here. And he asked, hopefully the next one is how to retrain these limiting factors after having spent a lot of time powerlifting. At the end of this video is some suggestions, but more in detail information would be great. So Matthew and anyone else out there who's spent a lot of time either bodybuilding or powerlifting or just general strength training and has lost that edge in their speed, then I'm going to take you through some more detailed ways you can retrain that quality to bring speed back into your fight game. So just a quick recap, performing a lot of powerlifting or bodybuilding style training without touching on the speed or high velocity side, you get these adaptations that essentially oppose speed and making you slow. Remember, speed is a quality that needs to be trained year round in order to maintain it and even to improve it. So here are 4 principles that you can take to retrain the speed after years spending lifting weights. And the first principle is extensive to intensive. Now, these 2 words are just essentially fancy names for labeling how hard or how intense the exercise should be. Extensive meaning play-like, rhythmic, smooth, sub-maximal, whereas intensive means maximal effort, high intensity. So the idea is that we want to start on the extensive end of the spectrum, which will be our low intensity, sub-maximal, smooth, rhythmic plyometrics and jumps, and even medicine ball throws. And then we want to gradually move towards the intensive side, and that might be things like drop jumps, high hurdle hops, maximal throws. The whole idea is that we can prepare the body for more intense jumps, throws, and plyometrics. You don't want to come into, for example, you spent a whole year doing other things and you haven't done anything in terms of speed development or plyometric or jumping, and then coming in and doing the most intense thing possible. You wouldn't go onto the field to run sprints if you haven't done that in the past 6 months. You know there's going to be a recipe for injury. The same thing happens with jumps and sprints. The stress on the tendons when performing high intensity plyometrics is huge. And if you haven't prepared the body to be able to handle that, that's when you end up with injury. Now I'm going to show you some examples of what extensive plyometrics jumps and throws look like and what intensive ones look like as we get to the more practical part of this video. The second principle is the idea of a neural imprint. Now when we're training, we want to do essentially the least amount of work possible to make progress. We want to just move that needle little by little so we have lots of room to move and we can make progress over a long period of time. Now, a big mistake people make is going to the very high intensity stimulus to get gains quickly. So for example, instead of coming in and doing your jump rope or various pogos as part of your extensive plyometrics, and instead coming in and doing depth jumps and drop jumps off say 30 or 50 centimeter boxes, you jump into the very intense end of the spectrum. And essentially you will make progress. So you'll make progress even if you haven't done anything. But the issue is now you've touched on the most intense stimulus you can. What do you do from there to continue progressing? And the issue becomes now you can't continue doing the same thing over and over again and make progress. At some point, you're going to hit too much volume, too much intensity, and you can't really change the exercise to get that new stimulus. So what happens is you create what is known as a neural imprint. Now that you've touched on this very high intensity activity, if you back off for however long and perform other exercises and then come back to it, this exercise might not have the same impact as it would if you went through all the logical steps to get there. If I jump straight there, I'm probably not going to have the same gains that I'm going to get if I performed all the logical steps. The third principle is don't stop your traditional strength training. Now, it may seem counterintuitive that you've just spent all this time doing bodybuilding style or powerlifting style training and now you want to become faster. It would make sense to remove that and then start performing just pure velocity based exercise. But the thing is, you don't want to just throw something away, especially as a combat fighter where you are essentially a mixed sport. You need a mix of multiple qualities. You need speed, strength, power, etc, etc. So you want to keep essentially traditional strength training on the back burner, not completely gone. So that means, for example, only performing 2 to 4 sets of a specific exercise, maybe at the end of training, or maybe at the beginning to help potentiate some of the more high velocity work you're going to do within the session. So it could be performing various jumps and throws in the beginning. It could be performing something maybe a heavier jump or throw, or even an Olympic lift after that. Then you could maybe touch on a little bit of traditional strength training just to maintain that quality. And then maybe you finish the session with some kind of light plyometric jump, because ideally you want to finish the session with the quality you want to train. So you start it with your priority, usually with the fastest movement, and at the end, finish the session with something fast as well, because the body tends to like to remember the last thing you did. And this all ties into principle number 4, and that is that speed is just an expression of force, but just done quickly. So that means we still need to maintain some of that strength that you have, even though a lot of it might not be as useful, because now you know that you're not as fast as you used to be. And the idea is that we need to be able to produce force quickly. So it doesn't matter if you can grind out a 500-pound squat. If you can't produce whatever that force is within a very small time frame, whatever that is within your combat sport or task you're doing, that is what is important in terms of speed. So all that means is that, again, traditional strength training on the back burner, but we're going to head towards the more high velocity exercises to be able to produce that force quickly. So what does this look like in practice? Now, if you go into the link in the description, I've got a warrior strength training course that actually runs through this in huge detail, and it covers essentially exactly how to phase out your training so you can build from someone who maybe hasn't done much in the past in terms of the speed stuff, and build your own program and progression to be able to reach these levels. But I'm going to run through some of it with you now on a faster basis. So let's take our principle of extensive to intensive when we're talking about jumps and plyometrics. So if we're on a continuum, our very first phase of extensive exercise will be things like jump and plyometric circuits. And this is essentially just to build that work capacity and that resilience within the muscles and tendons. So all we're going to do, I'm going to have a video up at the moment. It's just going to be showing you just a very simple jump and plyometric circuit. It just covers some basic things like squat jumps, pogos, which is just like essentially jumping rope but without the rope, various like lateral squat jumps, just a bunch of different variations done smoothly and rhythmically. Now the idea is you would do this near the beginning of your workout. The idea is that when you set out your training session, you move from the fast exercises and you work your way to your slow exercises near the end. And these would be considered some of your faster ones because they are ballistic or plyometric. Just a general rule of thumb. So for your jumping exercises, I usually stick to around 10 reps. For the more pogo style pop, like ankle pop exercises, I'll stick to around 20 reps. So it'll be anywhere between 10 to 20 for those. I'll generally take around a 10-second break between each exercise, but I'm going to run through essentially around 6 exercises in each circuit. And that circuit will be repeated either be done once or repeated 2 or 3 times, and you'll have a decent rest between each circuit. Then you move on to the next phase, and the next phase will be considered almost single impact jumps or even throws. While there are some multiple impact exercises like pogos, it's still very low intensity, and it's just to get that plyometric movement within the exercises. Now these ones are not done in a circuit. These ones are done essentially maximal jumps. So for example, box jumps, being able to jump and land on a box, there's not much impact there. Even broad jumps can fit into this category. So jumping out in front, you can even do it on a hill, and landing on the hill is going to lessen the impact as you land. We can also get into smaller hurdle hops, so just single hurdle hops. So basically jumping over one, hitting the ground quickly, and then jumping over the other, but making sure those are small hurdles. Again, we're keeping that intensity low enough where we're going to prepare as we get further down the spectrum. As we move to like the next phase, we're getting into more moderate impact and more continuous ground contact plyometrics and jumps. Now, just because we're in this third phase doesn't mean you can't use exercises from the previous phases. The idea is that you still want to touch on some of those. For example, they could be part of a warm-up. For example, you could perform box jumps before you came into some of these, just to make sure that you're ready to go for when you're performing things like loaded jump squats, or you're going to perform continuous hurdle hops, even high pogos or jumping rope, getting higher and higher off the ground with each ground contact. Tuck jumps are an easy one that you can do essentially anywhere, and that's going to give you that fast ground contact and a lot more impact on the ground than something like a simple pogo or jumping rope. Then finally, we have the shock method, or very high impact plyometrics. Now, not many people need to really get this far within their plyometrics and jumps. Once you become quite advanced, then you can maybe touch on these, but honestly, you don't really need to do these. These are for someone who's been training for a very long time and needs to edge out that extra little bit. You can get a lot done basically being from phase 3 and backwards. Now, if you do touch some of these, for example, depth jumps, drop jumps, even very high hurdle hops, you need to have done all the requisite work leading into this. Now, the past 3 phases you can literally do over many months before touching on something like this, or maybe a month and then coming back down. The idea is that through phases 2, 3, and 4, you would do essentially only a handful of reps in each exercise. Because they're not done in a circuit fashion, they're done with maximal intent. You're going to keep the reps lower, so anywhere from 1 to 5 reps. You're going to do potentially 1 to 3 to 5 sets, and you're going to have long rests between each set. You want to be essentially fully recovered before you start performing the next set. With the depth jump and drops jump, in terms of box height, so you're going to essentially exercise, you're going to step off the box and then spend as little amount of time on the ground as possible, and then jump as high as possible after you've made contact. The box doesn't have to be so high, especially when you're just starting out. A low box of 30 centimeters is the perfect place to start with these, and it's just about getting on and off the ground as quickly as possible. Once you get to phases 3 and 4, and sometimes a little bit of phase 2. As I mentioned earlier, you would perform these jumps and plyometrics at the beginning of your workout because you're working from fast to slow. But you don't have to do that always. You can actually progress that as you become comfortable. You can start to complex exercises, and that's the idea of performing a heavy strength training exercise. For example, performing a heavy back squat, for example, set of 3 at around, you could say up to 90%, anywhere 80 to 90%. And then you would have a little break, and this break is going to be individual and it's going to depend on the time you have to train and things like that. But generally, the longer the better. So we're looking over 2 minutes, 3 minutes. So it would be essentially like doing a superset, but then within that superset, having a long break. So you do your squat and you come in, then you might do your 3 box jumps. And the idea is that your back squat that you've done is going to potentiate the box jump. So you're going to be able to produce more force, more power, more speed while you're doing your box jump. And the idea is that if you do this over time, instead of performing box jumps on their own, you're now performing box jumps at a higher intensity, and then over the long term, that will lead to greater gains. So that's one way you can progress your jumps and plyometrics. Other than just progressing through phases and exercises, you can progress the actual structure of the session, where instead of just having these on their own, they can be integrated within the strength itself. And again, I cover a lot of this stuff within my Warrior Strength course, which is down in the description below. So one thing I didn't touch on was the medicine ball throws. Now, medicine ball throws can be done within same phases and essentially in the same way. So in our first phase, we're going to have extensive medicine ball throw circuits. And this can be essentially all of your normal throws that you would do. For example, scoop tosses overhead. It could be medicine ball slams, rotational throws against the wall. But you're going to do these extensively, meaning we're going to do sub-maximal throws. It's going to be smooth. It's going to be rhythmic. It's going to feel like essentially you're just going through the motions with it. Now, the idea is that we're essentially throwing the ball, absorbing impact over and over again. And we're essentially conditioning and increasing the work capacity of the upper body. So obviously with our jumps and plyometrics, we're focused on the lower body, whereas as combat sport athletes, we have a large upper body involvement, and medicine ball training is one way we can bring that in. So performing these extensive circuits with the medicine ball, these are a great way to perform that phase 1. As you prepare for the more intense medicine ball throws, as we move to phase 2, then you can start performing maximal throws. It could be maximal overhead scoop tosses. How high can you throw a ball? How far can you throw a ball? These are the most basic exercises you can perform with a medicine ball. I would recommend that you stick with a light medicine ball for a lot of these. The whole idea of medicine ball training is you want the speed and you want it to carry over to whatever it is you're doing. If you're a grappler, then heavy medicine ball scoop tosses would make sense. That's a perfect application of it. And by heavy, I mean I'm looking at like, say up to 10 kilo medicine ball, which is around 25 pounds. But if you're a striker and you're, for example, performing medicine ball punch throws or something similar, these should be like 2-3 kilos, which is around 4 to 6 pounds. Now, these throws are basic, simple, and you can use these pretty much throughout your training. If you want to increase the intensity even further, just for example, maybe you're in a peaking block leading into a fight or whatever it is, you can have almost like a shock method for medicine balls. So you can, if you're lying on the floor, someone can drop a medicine ball down to you and you're going to chest pass that back as fast as possible. You can be in a stance where someone passes you a medicine ball and you have to quickly catch and rebound that back as well within your punch technique or something similar, or even just a rotational throw. Just by someone passing a ball to you, you're going to increase that rate of stretch and you're going to increase the intensity of the exercises. And that's simple 3 phases there that you can use with medicine ball training. Just to wrap things up, make sure you go from these extensive modalities to the more intensive modalities. If you do that correctly, you're going to prepare yourself to retrain that speed component that you perhaps may be lacking from your other training.